We are now moving on to our first plenary session. So we've established the need for clean mobility. We've talked of some of the ways of getting it. Now we're going to go deeper into what are the options for clean mobility in the future. How do we keep moving around without trashing the planet, basically? As simple and as complicated as that. We've got an excellent discussion. Mr. Chengappa is going to continue as our moderator, and we have 3 expert panelists for you. So please welcome onto the stage Mr. Chinmaya Acharya, Chief of Programs of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, Mr. Siddharthan Balasubramanian, Senior Advisor Strategy at the Climate Works Foundation, and Professor Kazuhiko Takeuchi, President of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. And I'll hand over to Mr. Chengappa to continue the discussions. Thank you very much.
Well, after that fabulous session that set the pace for what is coming next, as our compeers said, we have a very interesting and detailed session, the nuts and bolts session, as I call this. And the reason why we went a little more on time was that Mr. Arun Goel, who was Secretary of Department of Heavy Industries, he was to actually give the keynote address, but he couldn't make it. And that was to set the stage. So we got Amitabh Kant in some senses to do that very brilliantly. And so you've listened to each of the speakers that came in this session. Could we have 5 minutes presentation from each of you all? And I'm going to start with the professor first to give your thoughts on the future, the way ahead as you've seen it, contexting it with what we had discussed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
All right.
I'm very pleased to be here as president of
5 minutes, we've got time, so sorry to remind you.
And also as a chair of the Central Environment Council, I would like to share with you some experiences, particularly in Japan. Transport is the 3rd largest emitter of CO2, as you know, and it occupies almost more than 20% of the total emissions, and particularly the road is a key for decarbonizing of the transportation. How we could decouple the accessibility of transport from the carbon emission. This is a crucial issues for achieving of the zero carbon society by the year 2050. It is important to combat the energy in the transportation sector, particularly investment to the renewable energy associated with the electric power storage system, as already explained by the previous speaker. This is crucial. And particularly if we talk about the city structure, it is quite important to shift from the private transport system to the public transport system. And IGES is supporting several municipalities in Japan to transform our transportation system. One of the examples is the Toyama City, where the mayor is trying to create the LRT system within the city and requesting the people to come down to the areas very close to the LRT, and so that they need not to use the private cars. And this is quite important because Japan is facing with the aging society. And if we ask the elderly people live far from the city core, it is quite problematic in terms of their amenity and their medical care and many things. And therefore, this type of trial is not just for solving of the traffic problems, but try to create the sustainable city. And we are also supporting various cities in Asia. One example is that we are having the very good collaboration with the Indonesian cities, which is called the Semarang City. And we are recommending them to convert the public transportation from diesel to the hybrid engine at this moment, which brought the 30% reduction of CO2 emission in the traffic sector. And very recently, last year, we tried to revise our basic environment plan. where I'm serving as a chair of the Central Environment Council. And we proposed the concept of combining decarbonized, resource circulating, and the society in harmony with nature. And we call it as a regional circulating and ecological sphere, or regional CES. This could be a basis for sustainable transportation too. And we are very pleased that this idea has been implemented in various Japanese cities. And also, right now, we are sending our proposal to the central government to get some financial support to develop our ideas in Asian cities, including India. And so it is quite important for us to collaborate with the many partner institutions and partner organizations. And this will bring us a new dimension of materializing of SDGs. So localization of SDGs in connection with the decarbonization based on the Paris Agreement will be the very crucial issues, not just to talk absolutely about the importance of SDGs, how we could implement on the local scale. This will be a very, very important challenge for us that we need to further develop. So I would like to finish my talk. I'm not sure I kept my time.
Yes, you've kept your time perfectly, maybe a minute less also. But we'll come back to you with questions. May I now invite Chinmay Acharya, Chief of Programs for Shakti Sustainable Energy, to make his presentation for 5 minutes. I'm starting the clock now. Okay.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity, and thank you, Terry, for the invitation. At the outset, I wanted to start with one admission, and that is that I feel rather overwhelmed after having heard what the CEO Niti Aayog expressed. And the second reason I'm overwhelmed is the kind of distinguished colleagues amongst which I'm sharing the dais. So please bear with me as I proceed with my presentation. When we look at the theme of the discussion today is in terms of how do we explore cleaner transportation solutions, what comes to my mind is that are we chasing one objective or there are multiple objectives? And what I feel is there probably are multiple objectives. What are the objectives? Not just a cleaner future and a cleaner environmental future, but the CEO Niti Aayog articulated that we are also looking at livability in cities, air quality in cities. We are looking at the trade deficit situation that we have. We are looking at our own energy security. This presents opportunities of an entirely different kind. When you have multiple objectives, then you have multiple interested parties, multiple stakeholders. And that's a blessing in disguise, because then it's a shared vision, the responsibility is shared across many different constituencies, and then collaborative working can kick in. But we need to create the right environment for a collaborative working. What I mean is, the government is well placed to provide policy signals, and which of course we are witnessing. The first generation policies have been spelt out, and that is doing some great job. And we are beginning to see that there is demand. The demand side has suddenly got stimulated. We see demand through the incentive program of the government, through the tax concessions that the government has offered on GST, through the aggregators playing a role in that area, the transport, the mobility service providers, aggregators playing a role in that area. So that's one side of the story. If we look at the major stakeholders, the government has acted. The private sector, the OEMs have acted, and we heard so much about on that front also from the CEO Niti Aayog on what is the developments that we are witnessing. And if I say that we are witnessing transition, that was the framing that I was going to use before I came here, but I got reminded again that we are actually witnessing disruption and not transition. So the OEMs are playing their role, The consumers are playing their role in terms of awareness. When awareness, there is increased awareness, the consumers are participating in making better buying decisions. So that's a positive. The civil society, the research institutions are playing their bit by providing plausible ways and means how, be it business model solutions, be it the technology options we have, be it creating consensus among stakeholders. So that's another positive. The scientific community is working on it. And on top of that, it's because it's a global disruption, we are getting the benefit of some global exchange as well. Now, it can also create difficulties when we have multiple interested parties. Shared objective is a beautiful phrase, but in reality, when one becomes practical about this issue, this also creates tensions, and these tensions need to be diffused in time. Otherwise, we will miss the opportunity.
How do half a minute to clear?
Sure. So, how do we address this issue? I think dialogue, deliberation, information sharing. Whenever there is any concern, looking at how the other we can build on the efforts of other constituencies to do troubleshooting, that will all be important in exploring solutions going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll come back to you on this. Mr. Siddharthan Balasubramaniam, head of India, head of Climate Works Foundation, you've got 5 minutes to make your points.
Thank you, Mr. Chengappa.
And I would like you to sort of, take options in each of these things rather than be general. Let's be specific on some of these things, okay?
Thank you very much. Good morning, all. And I think, first of all, thanks to Terry, Ajay and other colleagues in Terry for putting this a panel. Very timely. I think not a single day passes in India where one or the other thing happening on the EV across India, not just in Delhi. And that all signifies something. That's what Mr. Khan very eloquently said about the disruption and the mobility transition sweeping across the country. Amplified by the cities, that's what Professor said. It also gives a great dilemma for all of us, whether policymakers or people like us and you and me on the road. While it is driving the economic growth in terms of new mobility services, the demand for it, which is kind of exploding on a daily basis, it also leads to some of the what Chinmay referred to in terms of what are the negative impact on that. So the first strategic choice we have to make while we grapple with the issue is to, like sometimes we decouple, how to decouple the transition or explosion of mobility services and the economic growth from the negative impact of it. I think there's going to be a dilemma for a while, but we have to crack it. We have no choice but to crack it. The second thing I feel it is important is about mobility is not just quantified by the type of fuel used, including biofuel, as long as it is impact the environment. It is also not quantified just by the tailpipe emissions in terms of quantified CO2. To me, what the Prime Minister said in 2018 MOVE Summit about the 7 Cs, which still resonate with me in terms of, I may miss it, please count. It's a connected, common, convenient, congestion-free, clean, I think charged, and cutting edge. I hope the count is right. I think these characteristics of the mobility need to be part of any discourse, any decision making is going forward. That's my second thing, which is not easy. Second, the third one is, while we talk about mobility, clean mobility, there is an unintended tendency to miss out what we call the non-motorized transport. The people who bicycle, people walk, which I don't do much. 30% of Delhi actually walk on bike. In the industrial towns, if you see, 30% of people never uses motorized transportation. And when we do the discourse on mobility transition, let's remember that need to be factored into that. That's my third observation. Fourth one is what Mr. Khan said in terms of the electric mobility transition, which is one aspect of the cleaner mobility. We are setting the trend. I think within the country, to the outside world, not just to the developing world, but to the developed world also. We have a penetration in Delhi of car penetration approximately 80, whereas the country is just 8. So we are talking, it is more like AC penetration in the country. It is single-digit AC penetration, whereas China is 110. We are talking about a massive explosion of all sort of transportation, particularly passenger vehicle, four-wheelers coming on board as aspiration go up. How to manage the transition in a way which is manageable, which protect the environment as well as secure the economy. Finally, I want to say one thing, because I'll come back to the next round in terms of what need to happen specifically. The one thing as a philanthropy community we do is to support what Mr. Khan said from the government side, policymaker side. They give signal, they give incentive to kind of create a market and demand. But what the community like us will have to do is provide some of the risk-taking innovation. Put in money to build the capacity on the ground. Kickstart some of the R&D initiative. And in that aspect, I would say the role some of us playing is bringing the international best practice into the country, which is very important, not now. It's going to be ever for at least, my sense is, at least 10 to 15 years. Because we don't have to do the same mistake what America, Europe, or the Europe has done, or China for that matter, in terms of learning it. The first thing I want to cite two examples, the colleagues from the NRDC is around. Charging infrastructure going to be the most critical contingent factor for transition. That's what people say. You go to a petrol station, put a petrol, but you can't find where the charging station in and around it. I have no idea right now. So while that is a big issue, what we miss out is a small issue like where to put the charging infrastructure in a road. While the land is scarce, urban planning is not happening in the most ideal scenario. We don't have the data system which will say where exactly people move in terms of behaviors. I think one of the projects we are doing with our colleagues globally and India is to how to site the charging infrastructure. Very simple, but it could be quite impactful if you figure it out. In a similar way, in a Rocky Mountain Institute, our global partner, working extensively with Niti Aayog, completely given policy option, learning from California, China, and Europe, concept like fee-based, concept like ZEV mandate, zero emission vehicle mandate, how that could be used or modified, adapted for the Indian condition. So I can go on, including one more partner, which is called...
You've got 20 seconds to
exactly.
not go on.
So in micro-mobility, if you go to... I live in San Francisco, fortunately a state which goes against Mr. Khan said, we are progressive at least some point. I'm proud to be there. There you see the micro-mobility, people biking it out. We are testing out in India too. The point I'm making is, overall, there's a variety of roles we have to play, and philanthropy is playing a role.
Thank you. This will just open out for questions. And I'm going to start this to get very specific on some of these issues that we're looking at. We saw Mr. Kant outline a brilliant vision of what India should be doing, where the big disruptions are going to be, the great opportunities that are there. Let us take FAME 2, the program that the government has launched for faster adoption of and manufacturing of electric vehicles, for those who don't know the acronym for it. Now, it has an ambitious goal of 5 million. We are far below that. We're not even a million there. And that ambitious goal has to do a lot of what you all had pointed out, which is you need charging infrastructure. If you don't have that particularly reliable charging infrastructure, where we need to establish that. Where do we go from here? The second aspect of it is, of course, your storage, your ability, your battery performance, your maintenance of those batteries. We don't have those problems when you have a petrol vehicle. You can continue to run. Of course, you do have maintenance issues of other kinds. So where does that factor? And the third, of course, is the pricing factor, which I think to some extent the government has addressed through providing incentives through GST and lowering the price of these vehicles. So let us start with this infrastructure, charging infrastructure. Maybe, Professor, you can give us a perspective for a couple of minutes as to how you see what needs to be done in India, the experiences you learned from other places.
Yes, this is a very important question in terms of transition from the current situation to the sustainable stage. One of the joint programs that we have been conducting in the past 10 years as a professor at the University of Tokyo in collaboration with the oil refinery company. And this company has a company to produce the solar panels. And what we are now discussing is how we could use the current oil station to be converted to the renewable energy station in the future. So this is why we are now trying to collaborate with the oil refinery company. I was a little bit criticized by other professors, but my aim is try to create the clear figure to show the transition from the current situation to the sustainable future.
Okay. What would you say is the most important thing? Well, let's just take a look at infrastructure for charging. What would you say your observations seeing India's condition?
Sure. I would actually second what Professor outlined. That is because in India, when we look at in the urban areas, land is the most expensive resource. We of course have all the fuel stations, but we cannot wish them away. They will continue to exist for some more time. If the charging infrastructure till such time there is adequate utilization of it, they will not make money. And hence, to the extent the most expensive resource, land here, could be addressed, that should be explored, and we should look at, there are of course safety issues, there are other issues that need to be studied, but we need to be focusing in that area so that we can optimize on one very scarce resource.
And you, Mr. Palas?
I think it is quite a few things in charging infrastructure. One, I said about how to site it. That's one thing. Where to put it, that's one thing. The other one is what we call the SMV infrastructure, which has several component decision protocols, because you have AC-DC conversion, DC-AC conversion, depending on where the charger is. In Tesla, some models you have a charger inside, whereas the battery anyway need a DC. Whereas some charging station you have only AC, which you need to be converted. So one whole list of protocol on the electricity side is very important. But what I see in India happening is most important one, the Ministry of Power, which Kant said, or Ajay said, making the whole charging as a service, not get into the bureaucracy, red tape of, whether it should apply for the permission, license, rather making it as anybody can do it without a permit. That's the most important one. Merit percent, that's number one. I think number two is I talked about protocol. And the third one is about how to learn quickly from state like California, US, who figured it out. California has around 26,000 chargers, mixture of fast and slow, ranging from 25 to all the way to 300 kilowatt. And we need to learn that quickly. And 2 weeks ago, the Lieutenant Governor of California is here, just selling California to India. Let's leverage that kind of opportunity offered from progressive state who figured out how to bring the technology expertise into the country. The third one is, I think, the pricing you talked about, which is a critical thing in India. In US, in California, and China, there are graded pricing depending on how fast the charger is, pointing from 0.25 cents to all the way to $1 if it is a 300 kilowatt of charging. So you have graded pricing, and what does it mean for this country, how to learn that. And my final point is, it's all about digital world, and we are the master of digital world with this tech power we have. The more and more we go to electrification of transportation, how to use the digital payment to make it easy for all of us. I recall in Electrify America, a company in the US, the moment you put a charger in the charging station, it reads your car. It reads about everything about your car. It tells you when to charge. Then you get an app, how long you can go and have a coffee, if it is. So I'm sure it is happening here too. But what I mean to say is how to leverage our digital and the data strength to make the whole transition efficient.
I think these are very good points that are there. And in terms of technology absorption, let's not forget that we had a telecom revolution.
Yes.
We have the largest number of cell phones in the country, right across rural areas as well. And the reason that explosion came was two things. One, the prices of charges dropped dramatically. And therefore, we have one of the cheapest call rates in the world in that. And second, the number of sets, the sheer scale enabled the prices of those sets to drop in this one. So we do have an example of it. I think the real problem is that when we look at the telecom sector, and as we've seen the trouble that's happened, is firstly, none of those sets are made in India. We have now become prisoners of, I'm not saying prisoners, that's a negative way to look at it, but dependent on all outside manufacturers, original equipment manufacturers that are now, may have set up units here, but that technology, we do not have the levels of that technology available here in that sense. Right. So how does one, when you look at, should we be making the same mistakes in the EV sector? The fact that we are now highly dependent on battery technology, for this, even in terms of motors, parts, and everything. We may be doing very positive stuff that's happening, as we've seen in certain Indian companies, but are we again going to be, in some senses, colonized in the EV sector? So let's start with maybe, Professor, you would like to say how India should build its own R&D, build its own, or we'll lose the race. I mean, it's a very difficult decision. We keep waiting for the Indian industry to catch up, we're losing the race. So, I mean, we went ahead in the telecom sector.
I think there are two aspects. One is the possibility of colonization if you try to collaborate with the industries, for example, in Japan.
Right.
But if you consider it as a positive collaboration, international collaboration, and try to transfer the technology to the Indian industry sectors, this could be a sort of a win-win situation. And therefore, my observation is that we need to avoid the colonization, but at the same time, we need to facilitate the collaboration based on the most advanced
very
technology.
nice way to put it. Diplomatic on this one. Collaboration, that's the key on this one. What do you have to say about this, that we don't get subsumed by technology in this rush to be, to reduce our carbon footprint, but in actuality benefiting others, not directly us on this?
So it is actually in many ways a catch-22 because many people would advocate that a waiting game is better because we don't know what kind of technologies will play out, should we lock ourselves in. But that may be a very conventional wisdom because with that also we lose out on a lot of opportunity. We are a global auto export major, so we are actually losing out on international market share as well. So any efforts to promote local R&D, local manufacturing, and learning from that process would be welcome. And we could link it up with Make in India. We could link it up with other investment promotion agenda that the government of India has and could facilitate that process.
And you? Yes.
I'll be quick. I think Mr. Khan touched upon this. That's going to be the important two things: local manufacturing and making India as a hub for global manufacturing and export as well. If we have the resolve and the political will, it is a question of, in EV transition, what all things would happen in terms of import? Automobile parts, the car itself, or the batteries. These are two things. And battery now, right, 45% of the total cost. The whole thing about what the government said, the phase 2 manufacturing program, which is a 5-year program through 2024, is about making the battery manufacture local. That is going to be important. That's where the process chemistry, we have the expertise on process chemistry with a massive lab under the CSIR. Now, why can't we make it, even change the process chemistry from lithium ion to something else? He talked about hydrogen, which is a bit far right now, but that's one thing. The second thing I would say is about how to make the R&D and the product comes as a business, because the government cannot drive for a long. It has to be the private sector, the market to drive the innovation leading to R&D. In the US and Europe, globally right now, $300 billion the private sector is investing on new process, electric vehicle manufacturing. It is not public. Even Tesla, the early money the Department of Energy pushed in as a loan to Tesla really paid off with the set up the massive Nevada factory. They have the gigafactory. The point I'm making is you need to give triggers for R&D in science and innovation, but it need not be a single domain of the government or anybody. It need to be more.
We are running out of time, so I'm just going to ask one question, just one answer from you all in terms of, if you looked at the priorities that we have to set, what would be the one big thing you would advise the government or us to do? One thing, you sir.
In terms of traffic?
In terms of, moving towards this great transition that we're talking. What is the one big thing we need to do?
One big thing I think is that, as Mr. Acharya said, multiple objective or integrated approach will be very important. There are so many objectives, so many things to consider, and it is not effective to consider one by one, because global challenges are interrelated, intertwined, and therefore we need to take a holistic approach to solve the issues. This would be a most important priority that we should give.
since he's taken your point, what is what do you have to say as the biggest thing? Yes.
So I would probably have a fresh point, and I've already borrowed Professor's point one time, so I will skip from doing that. My sense is that we should be smartly looking at which segments could be our priority segments. Mr. Kant mentioned about his own assessment is how can we stimulate the public transport demand. But we should also be looking at probably the two-wheelers as well and the freight vehicles as well. And each of these segments will probably require customized strategies. So that is what we should be applying our minds on.
And you, sir, quickly, one big point.
I think we have to be visionary. We set a vision, let's resolve to maintain the vision, be imaginative, and drive innovation, and make India as a hub, as he said, as a global innovation of mobility and transition.
Well, let's give them a warm round of applause. They could have said more, but we have run out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you.